The air hung thick with the scent of lilies and hope. Sunlight, filtered through stained glass, painted the faces of those gathered in soft, ethereal hues. A man, 42 years of age, stood at the altar, a faint smile playing on his lips, a glimmer in his eyes that had been absent for far too long. This was David Miller, and this was his second chance, his redemption, his happily ever after. He believed he was marrying the love of his life, a woman named Lena, radiant in an ivory gown, her calm, honey-brown eyes meeting his with a silent promise of forever. He believed he had found his soulmate, a balm for the scars of a painful past, a beacon guiding him toward a future he dared to dream of again. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, and the kiss, soft and tender, sealed a love story that felt, to all who witnessed it, utterly perfect, a beginning, a rebirth. But some beginnings are merely prologues to unimaginable ends. Some vows whisper of promises broken before they are even fully made. And some love stories, though they start bathed in the golden light of hope, will inevitably descend into the deepest shadows, revealing secrets so profound, so shattering, that they rip apart not just a life, but the very identity of the man who thought he knew it all. 2 days. Just 2 days after David Miller uttered those sacred words, "I do," the idyllic scene of marital bliss would morph into a tableau of unimaginable horror. The serene tranquility of their honeymoon cabin, nestled amidst the whispering pines and the crisp mountain air, would be violently punctured. The soft glow of dawn would illuminate not the gentle awakening of newlyweds, but the stark, chilling reality of a nightmare. She lay there, sprawled on the polished wooden floor, a silent, still form in a nightgown, surrounded by a crimson halo that spread outwards like a macabre floral design. Shot 6 times. 6 times. A brutal, intimate act of violence in a space meant for shared dreams and whispered intimacies. Her name was Lena, his wife, his second chance, and she was dead. When the sirens wailed their mournful song through the winding mountain roads, when the flashing lights of law enforcement cut through the pre-dawn gloom, they found David Miller. Not in a state of shock or grief or desperate remorse, at least not in the way they expected. He was there, present, almost eerily calm, amidst the chaos he had wrought. And when they asked him, eyes wide with the professional detachment of those accustomed to humanity's darkest corners, why he had done it, he didn't speak of betrayal in the conventional sense. He didn't accuse her of infidelity, of breaking a sacred trust in the usual ways. Instead, his voice, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to carry the weight of an entire lifetime's undoing, offered only a single cryptic explanation. An answer that was no answer at all, yet chillingly profound in its simplicity. He just said, "She used to be my best friend." A best friend? What could transform the deepest bond of platonic companionship into such a violent, fatal betrayal in the sanctity of a marriage? What secret could unravel a man so completely, so fundamentally, that he would turn a weapon on the woman he had just sworn to cherish? This is the story of David Miller, a man who thought he knew love, who thought he knew truth, who thought he knew himself. It is the story of a wedding that began with promises and ended with bullets, of a secret so deep, so carefully guarded, that it shattered not just a life, but a man's very identity, leaving a nation to ponder, how far will someone go when the truth destroys everything they thought they were? They say love always finds a way, but sometimes it finds a way right back into your darkest nightmares. This is the tragic, complex, and ultimately heartbreaking true crime story of a hidden past, a violent present, and the devastating cost of a truth too heavy to bear. Prepare yourself, for the story you are about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about trust, identity, and the depths of human rage when confronted with the unimaginable. To truly understand the depth of the tragedy that unfolded in that secluded cabin, we must first journey back, long before the vows were exchanged or the secrets laid bare. We must understand David Miller, the man who stood at that altar on a seemingly ordinary afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia. At 42, David was not a man who had easily found peace or lasting happiness in his adult life. The preceding decade had been a crucible of emotional isolation and lingering pain, largely shaped by a divorce that had left deep, unhealed wounds. His marriage, once a cornerstone of his identity, had crumbled, leaving him adrift in a sea of self-doubt and loneliness. He had retreated into himself, finding solace in the quiet solitude of his routine, building walls around his heart that he believed were impenetrable. Hope, in the romantic sense, had become a foreign concept, a luxury he felt he could no longer afford. He focused on his work, a successful career that offered structure and a sense of purpose, but it could not fill the void where genuine human connection once thrived. Friends tried to pull him out, set him up on dates, but David's guarded nature and the shadow of his past made true intimacy seem impossible. He carried a quiet resignation, an acceptance that perhaps a profound, soul-stirring love was simply not meant for him. Then Lena arrived, not with a grand entrance or a dramatic flourish, but subtly, like the first hint of spring after a harsh winter. They met through mutual acquaintances, a casual gathering that David had almost characteristically skipped. But something about Lena captivated him from their first brief conversation. She wasn't loud or demanding of attention. Instead, there was a quiet magnetism about her, an aura of calm composure that drew people in without effort. She possessed an undeniable beauty. Her soft, honey-brown eyes held a serene wisdom, and her gentle smile, though subtle, seemed to radiate a warmth that slowly, imperceptibly, began to melt David's carefully constructed defenses. Lena was different from anyone David had ever known. She listened more than she spoke, yet when she did speak, her words carried a thoughtful depth. She seemed to understand him in a way few others had, seeing past his guarded exterior to the vulnerabilities and hidden desires beneath. She didn't push or pry, but offered a quiet empathy that made him feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. This wasn't merely surface-level attraction, it was a profound, soul-deep resonance that David had long believed was a myth. He found himself opening up, sharing fragments of his past, his hopes, his fears, things he hadn't voiced to anyone, perhaps not even to himself, in a decade. Their courtship was a gradual unfolding, a gentle dance of two souls cautiously approaching a new understanding. Lena was meticulous, attentive, and incredibly supportive. She remembered small details, anticipated her needs, and created an atmosphere of unwavering care and tenderness around him. For David, who had felt unmoored and unloved for so long, Lena was an anchor, a quiet harbor. She made him believe in second chances, not just for love, but for himself. She rekindled a spark of joy within him, a sense of lightness he had forgotten existed. He found himself laughing more, dreaming more, living more fully than he had dared to since his divorce. As their relationship deepened, David noticed a few peculiarities about Lena, subtle nuances that, at the time, seemed insignificant, easily explained away by her unique personality or past. She rarely spoke of her family. When the topic arose, her answers were vague, often accompanied by a wistful smile and a simple explanation. "My family situation is complicated." David, respecting her privacy and caught up in the euphoria of new love, didn't press. He had his own baggage after all, and he believed in meeting people where they were, without dwelling on past wounds they weren't ready to share. He interpreted her reticence as a sign of her quiet strength, her self-reliance, rather than a hidden truth. Lena also seemed uncomfortable with certain forms of physical intimacy, particularly concerning her body. There was a subtle hesitancy, a slight recoiling whenever David's touch lingered too long on certain areas. She would quickly redirect or gently shift away, always with a sweet smile, attributing it to shyness or a preference for tenderness over passion. David, ever eager to please and afraid of jeopardizing the fragile new happiness they were building, respected these unspoken boundaries. He saw it as part of her delicate nature, a facet of her quiet grace. He told himself that true love was about understanding and acceptance, not about demanding physical conformity. He rationalized that perhaps her past experiences, also unspoken, made her hesitant. Despite these minor quirks, which he mentally filed away as charming eccentricities, David was utterly convinced Lena was the one. She embodied everything he had ever yearned for: companionship, understanding, peace, and a profound sense of connection. After a year of courtship, David, feeling a conviction he hadn't thought possible, proposed. Lena accepted, her eyes shining with what he perceived as deep emotion, her voice soft with gratitude. The wedding was planned to be small, intimate, a reflection of their quiet love story. Just 30 guests, mostly David's closest friends and family. Lena, true to her nature, had no family members present. She explained they lived far away and that their complicated situation meant they weren't close enough to attend. David, basking in his renewed happiness, accepted this without question. He was marrying Lena, and that was all that mattered. The ceremony itself was a dream realized. Lena radiant and serene. David beaming, a sense of lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The vows, exchanged with unwavering sincerity, painted a picture of a future filled with shared joys, quiet companionship, and a love that promised to mend all past hurts. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, husband and wife, David felt a profound sense of destiny. He had found his soulmate, his second chance, a new beginning. He could not have known that this perfect beginning, forged from hope and a carefully constructed veil of secrets, was already hurtling towards an end more shattering than any nightmare. He was blind to the undercurrents, deaf to the silent warnings, believing wholeheartedly in the beautiful lie he had embraced. The wedding reception was a blur of joyful faces, clinking glasses, and the gentle rhythm of celebration. David, still enveloped in the heady warmth of his newfound happiness, watched Lena gracefully navigate the room, exchanging quiet pleasantries with his friends and family. There was a serene elegance about her, an unforced charm that everyone seemed to gravitate towards. He felt a swelling pride, a deep contentment that this remarkable woman was now his wife. As the evening drew to a close, they slipped away, hand in hand, disappearing into the Atlanta night towards their pre-booked hotel suite for their first night as husband and wife. The suite was luxurious, a tranquil haven amidst the city's hum. It was there, in the quiet intimacy of their private space, that David anticipated the true beginning of their shared life. He imagined soft whispers, tender touches, and the deepening of a bond he already cherished. Lena was, as always, composed and graceful. She moved with a delicate shyness, almost like a precious artifact he was privileged to observe. They talked for a while, recounting the day's most joyous moments, their voices hushed, their eyes meeting frequently. David felt a profound peace wash over him, a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. This was real. This was home. Yet even in this sacred, intimate space, there was a subtle undercurrent, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor beneath the surface of Lena's composure. When David's hand brushed her skin, when his gaze lingered with too much intensity, there was a fleeting hesitation in her movements, a barely there withdrawal. She would quickly recover, offering a soft smile, a gentle redirect, always assuring him of her affection, her love. David, ever mindful of her quiet nature and his own desire not to rush or discomfort her, respected these unspoken boundaries. He attributed it to a natural modesty, perhaps a lingering shyness, or even a deep-seated respect for the sanctity of their new bond. He simply saw it as another facet of her unique beauty, something to be cherished and understood, rather than questioned. He remembered a brief moment as Lena was preparing for bed when her back was to him. He caught a glimpse of something on her upper thigh, a faint linear mark, almost like a scar. It was momentary, obscured quickly by the movement of her nightgown, and he dismissed it. Perhaps a childhood injury, an old memory. His mind, overflowing with the joy of their union, had no room for suspicion or intrusive thoughts. He saw only the woman he loved, the future they were building, and pushed aside any fleeting, unexamined observations. His heart was too full of trust to allow doubt to take root. The next morning, the city of Atlanta sparkled under a clear sky. Their bags packed, they set off for their honeymoon destination, a secluded, picturesque cabin nestled deep within the North Carolina mountains. Lena had meticulously planned every detail of the trip, from the scenic route they would take to the cozy cabin they would inhabit. She seemed to relish the role of thoughtful organizer, ensuring every aspect of their journey was perfect. David, content to be led by her gentle hand, felt a profound sense of relief. After years of carrying the weight of his own decisions and responsibilities, it was a liberating experience to simply trust and follow. The drive was filled with easy conversation, laughter, and the shared anticipation of their escape. They spoke of mundane things, the beauty of the passing landscapes, the music on the radio, future dreams of travel and family. There was an unspoken agreement between them, a comfortable rhythm that spoke volumes of their connection. David felt a profound sense of peace. He believed he had found not just a wife, but a true partner, someone who brought a quiet harmony into his chaotic world. The mountain air grew crisper as they ascended, and the cabin, when they finally arrived, was everything Lena had promised: rustic charm, breathtaking views, and a profound sense of quietude. The first full day of their honeymoon unfolded like a dream. They hiked gentle trails, cooked simple meals together, and spent hours in companionable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. David felt a renewal within him, a blossoming of joy that he hadn't experienced since his youth. He looked at Lena, bathed in the soft, natural light filtering through the cabin windows, and saw only grace, beauty, and unwavering devotion. He truly believed he had been blessed, that after all his pain, fate had finally led him to his perfect match. He allowed himself to fully surrender to this new happiness, believing implicitly in the woman by his side, in the sanctity of their bond. Yet, as the sun began to set on their first full day in the cabin, casting long, dramatic shadows across the wooden interior, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack began to form in the perfect veneer of their honeymoon. It wasn't a dramatic event, no sudden shock or overt conflict. It was something far more insidious, something small and easily overlooked, but which, in retrospect, would be seen as the first thread unraveling the tapestry of David's carefully constructed happiness. A misplaced item, a moment of accidental discovery, a whisper of something other than what he believed to be true. It was a fragment of a secret, inadvertently exposed, that would begin to chip away at David's perception of his new wife, and ultimately of himself. The idyllic honeymoon, meant to solidify their love, was about to become the crucible where hidden truths would ignite a firestorm of doubt and despair. The tranquil mountain cabin, a sanctuary of nascent love, slowly began to shed its idyllic facade. The crisp air, once a refreshing embrace, seemed to carry a new, subtle chill. David, still basking in the glow of his honeymoon, found his contentment tinged with an unexpected, almost imperceptible flicker of unease. It began, as many profound revelations do, with something mundane, a simple oversight that ripped through the carefully woven fabric of his reality. One lazy afternoon, Lena was in the shower, the gentle hum of the water filling the small cabin. David was tidying up, putting away their belongings. He reached for Lena's travel bag, intending to place it neatly in the closet, when something slipped from an unzipped side pocket. It was a small, worn black notebook. Nothing particularly remarkable, just a simple journal. David, with no intention of prying, simply bent to pick it up, his fingers brushing against the soft, slightly aged cover. But as he did, the notebook fell open, revealing a page of neat, cursive handwriting. And there, etched onto the page in stark, undeniable clarity, was a name. A name that, in an instant, drained the color from David's face and sent a jolt of ice through his veins. The name was Jaden Hayes. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sound of the shower, the birdsong outside, the very air in the cabin, all seemed to recede, leaving only the thunderous pounding of his own heart. Jaden Hayes. The name echoed in his mind, resonant with 20 years of silence, a ghost from a past he had long since buried. Jaden Hayes was not just a name. Jaden Hayes was David's best friend from high school, his confidant, the only person who had ever truly understood him during his tumultuous teenage years. Jaden Hayes was a quiet, artistic soul, deeply empathetic, with a mischievous glint in his eyes that always promised adventure. They had shared secrets, dreams, and the awkward rites of passage into young adulthood. Then, abruptly, after graduation, Jaden had simply vanished. No forwarding address, no goodbye, just a sudden, inexplicable disappearance that had left David bewildered and heartbroken. He had grieved the loss of that friendship deeply, a void that had never truly been filled. For 20 years, the name Jaden Hayes had been synonymous with an unsolved mystery, a lingering question mark in the back of David's mind. And now, here it was, scrawled in a notebook belonging to his wife. A wave of dizzying confusion washed over David. What was Lena doing with Jaden's notebook? Was it merely a coincidence? A shared acquaintance he was unaware of? His mind raced, desperate to construct a logical explanation. He heard the shower stop and the sound of Lena moving. Panicked, he quickly closed the notebook and tried to slip it back into her bag, his hands suddenly clumsy, trembling slightly. Lena emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her hair damp, a soft smile on her face. She saw the notebook in his hand, and for the first time, David noticed a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her demeanor. Her eyes, usually so warm and calm, hardened just a fraction. Her smile, though still present, didn't quite reach them. She moved quickly, smoothly, taking the notebook from his hand with a casual grace that felt, to David, eerily practiced. "Oh, that old thing," she murmured, her voice light, perhaps a little too light. "Just some old notes from a project." She slipped the notebook into a different, more secure pocket in her bag, a pocket David hadn't noticed before, and zipped it up. Her movements were swift, almost dismissive, as if to say, nothing to see here. But David had seen. He had seen the name, and he had seen the fleeting, unreadable expression in her eyes. The dismissal felt too convenient, the smile too practiced. The seed of doubt, once a tiny flicker, now began to germinate, sending a cold tendril of suspicion through his heart. Throughout the rest of the day, an unspoken tension hung between them, thin as a spider's silk, yet undeniably present. David found himself observing Lena more closely, his gaze lingering, searching for answers in her every gesture, every expression. He replayed the incident with the notebook, dissecting her words, her movements, her subtle changes in demeanor. The earlier fleeting observation of the scar on her thigh resurfaced in his memory, nagging at him with a newfound insistence. He tried to dismiss it, to tell himself he was being foolish, paranoid, but the image of the name Jaden Hayes burned brightly in his mind, a relentless, unanswerable question. That night, as Lena slept peacefully beside him, David lay awake, his mind a turbulent storm. He couldn't shake the memory of Jaden, his best friend, the boy he'd shared so much with. He remembered a particular incident from their youth, a small adventure gone wrong, resulting in Jaden sustaining a distinctive scar on his inner thigh, a jagged, almost star-shaped mark. He remembered helping Jaden clean it, the details etched vividly into his memory. And then, like a lightning bolt, the memory of the scar he'd glimpsed on Lena's thigh just the day before flashed before his eyes. It was quick, fleeting, but undeniably there. The shape, the location, the chilling, impossible coincidence. His heart hammered against his ribs. The realization, nascent and terrifying, began to form in the deepest recesses of his mind. It was a thought so outrageous, so profoundly unsettling, that his entire being recoiled from it. Could it be? Could Lena, his beautiful, gentle wife, be Jaden? The thought was an assault on his sanity, a betrayal of everything he believed to be true. His reality, once so solid and comforting, began to fracture. The perfect love story was crumbling, revealing a precipice of unimaginable truth. The tension in the cabin was no longer subtle. It was a suffocating presence, a silent scream building in the quiet darkness, threatening to tear apart the very foundations of his existence. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had to confront her. The truth, however devastating, could no longer remain buried. The cabin, once a haven of peace, now felt like a cage. Every whisper of the wind through the pines outside seemed to mock David's turmoil. The question of Jaden Hayes gnawed at him, a relentless, burning ember in his mind. He couldn't eat, he couldn't rest. Lena, oblivious or perhaps expertly feigning ignorance, continued to move through their honeymoon with her usual serene grace. But to David, her calm now felt like a sinister veil, a deliberate obfuscation of a truth he desperately needed to uncover. The tension was a tangible entity between them, thick and suffocating. David tried to engage Lena in casual conversation, attempting to steer it subtly towards her past, her childhood, her family. But Lena, with an almost uncanny ability, would gently divert, her answers remaining vague, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Each evasive response fueled David's growing suspicion, painting her calm demeanor not as serenity, but a calculated effort to conceal. The woman he had loved so blindly now seemed like a stranger, a puzzle with missing pieces, a carefully constructed illusion. He needed proof. He needed clarity. The image of the scar on her thigh, combined with the name in the notebook, coalesced into a terrifying hypothesis. He had to see it again, had to confirm the impossible. Later that day, as Lena was momentarily distracted, perhaps fetching something from the other room, David acted. His hands trembled as he sought out her bag, specifically the secured pocket where she had so swiftly stowed the black notebook. With a surge of adrenaline, he found it, retrieved the journal, and flipped through its pages with a frantic urgency. It wasn't a mere journal. It was a chronicle, a meticulously kept record of a journey, a transformation. There were dates, thoughts, struggles, entries about gender dysphoria, about the long, arduous process of transitioning, about the emotional and physical toll. And scattered throughout, in her own handwriting, were references to a past self, to a life lived as a boy, as Jaden Hayes. The evidence was irrefutable. It hit David like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Lena wasn't just familiar with Jaden Hayes. Lena was Jaden Hayes, his childhood best friend, the boy who had vanished, now standing before him as the woman he had just married. The world spun. David stumbled backward, clutching the notebook, his mind reeling. The betrayal was monumental, an earthquake beneath the very foundations of his identity. He felt a profound sense of humiliation, of being duped, lied to, made a fool of. How could he not have known? How could he have been so blind? This wasn't just a secret. It was a complete reshaping of reality, a fundamental alteration of the person he believed he had fallen in love with. The intimate moments, the tender touches, the shared dreams, they all now felt like a grotesque charade, a performance carefully orchestrated by someone he thought he knew, but clearly did not. Just then, Lena re-entered the room. Her eyes fell on David, standing rigid, pale, holding her notebook. The serene mask crumbled instantly. Her face, for the first time, registered genuine alarm, then a flicker of deep sorrow. "David," she began, her voice soft, tentative. "What's wrong?" David's voice, when it came, was a choked whisper, raw with a pain that bordered on rage. "Jaden Hayes," he uttered, holding up the notebook, his hand shaking. "Jaden Hayes is who? Lena, who are you?" The question hung heavy in the air, shattering the last vestiges of their honeymoon bliss. Lena's shoulders slumped. The moment of truth, the one she had dreaded for so long, had arrived. Tears welled in her eyes, not of deception, but of profound regret and vulnerability. She knew there was no turning back, no more hiding. She had to tell him everything. She began to speak, her voice trembling at first, then gaining a quiet strength as she laid bare her soul. She told him of her lifelong struggle, the agonizing truth of living in a body that felt alien, of being assigned male at birth, but knowing, deep in her core, that she was a woman. She spoke of the courage it took to embrace her true self, the pain of rejection from her own family, the loneliness of her journey. She recounted the medical procedures, the hormones, the meticulous care she had taken to transition, to finally align her outer self with her inner truth. She explained why she had vanished after high school, not out of malice, but out of necessity, to undergo her transition in peace, to become the woman she was always meant to be. "I never meant to deceive you, David," she pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. "When we met, I was Lena. I am Lena. I loved you, and I was so afraid of losing you. I wanted to tell you so many times, but the words, they just wouldn't come. I feared your judgment, your rejection. I feared that if you knew the truth about my past, you wouldn't see me anymore. You wouldn't see Lena." She reached out a trembling hand, trying to bridge the chasm that had suddenly opened between them. "Please, David, I am still the woman you fell in love with. My past doesn't change who I am now. It doesn't change my love for you." But David couldn't hear it. Her words, intended to explain, instead sounded like further confirmation of a profound deception. His mind was not processing her journey, her courage, her vulnerability. It was consumed by a singular, suffocating thought. She, my best friend, my wife, a man. The world swam before his eyes. His identity, once rooted in a clear understanding of himself as a heterosexual man, a man who had chosen a woman, was crumbling. The very fabric of his reality, his sense of self, his understanding of his own sexuality and desires was being violently torn apart. He saw not the brave woman revealing her truth, but the friend who had lied to him, the wife who had deceived him into a marriage based on a false premise. The love he had felt turned to a bitter, acrid taste in his mouth. He felt disgusted by the deception, and, in a terrifying flash of self-loathing, disgusted by himself for not knowing, for having been fooled. The transformation was complete. The hopeful groom was gone, replaced by a man consumed by a toxic cocktail of betrayal, confusion, and a burgeoning rage. The words hung in the air, suspended between them like a fragile, deadly echo. Lena's confession, a desperate plea for understanding, met with David's utter inability to comprehend. His mind, once so ordered, now fractured under the weight of a truth he perceived as the ultimate deception. He saw not her courage, not her vulnerable soul, but only the elaborate charade, the years of what he believed to be a calculated lie. The cabin, once filled with the warmth of their nascent love, transformed into an arena for a primal battle within David's own psyche. He stumbled away from her, his breath ragged, his hands clammy. He needed space, air, an escape from the suffocating revelation. He burst out of the cabin, leaving Lena sobbing behind him, her pleas for him to stay fading with each desperate stride. Outside, the majestic mountain scenery, once a source of serenity, now mocked his internal tempest. The pines seemed to whisper judgments. The distant peaks loomed like silent accusers. He paced frantically, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of anger, humiliation, and profound existential confusion. A man! I married a man! The words hammered at him, stripping away his sense of self, his identity as a heterosexual man, his understanding of his own desires. He felt violated, betrayed, fundamentally altered by a truth he couldn't reconcile. His mind raced back to every intimate moment, every tender touch, every whispered promise. Each memory was now poisoned, twisted into a grotesque mockery of what he believed it to be. He replayed Lena's confession, but instead of hearing her pain, he heard only the confirmation of his own perceived folly. He was Darius Simmons, a man who had been duped, publicly shamed in the most intimate way imaginable. The deep-seated anger, simmering beneath the surface of his shock, began to boil. It wasn't just about Lena's secret, it was about the destruction of his own self-perception, the violent unraveling of his very being. Hours passed. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the darkness gathering in David's soul. Lena remained inside, her sobs eventually subsiding into a quiet, desperate vigil. David knew he had to go back in. The confrontation wasn't over. It had only just begun. But the man who re-entered that cabin was not the same man who had stormed out hours before. The hopeful groom was gone, replaced by a vessel of fractured identity and incandescent rage. Lena was sitting on the couch, head bowed, her body racked with silent tremors. She looked up as David entered, her eyes swollen and red, yet still holding a glimmer of hope, a desperate longing for understanding and forgiveness. "David," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, let me explain. Let me make you understand. My love for you is real. I am real." But David didn't speak. He walked past her, his gaze fixed, his movements stiff and deliberate. His eyes fell upon a small locked wooden box on the mantelpiece, a keepsake box where he kept a few personal items, including his handgun. It was a pistol he owned for personal protection, rarely touched, usually forgotten. But in that moment, in the suffocating silence of the cabin, it called to him, not as a tool of defense, but as an instrument of ultimate control, a means to end the torment, to silence the agonizing questions, to reclaim some twisted semblance of his shattered reality. Lena watched him, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, as he retrieved the key, unlocked the box, and slowly, deliberately picked up the cold, metallic weight of the firearm. "David, what are you doing?" Her voice was laced with pure terror, a stark contrast to her earlier gentle pleas. She tried to rise, to move towards him, but he simply raised a hand, a silent, chilling gesture for her to stop. He turned, his face devoid of emotion, a blank canvas upon which only his inner turmoil was etched. He saw Lena, his wife, the woman who was once his friend, now a symbol of profound deception. The rage, cold and absolute, consumed him. He raised the gun. Lena gasped, a choked, desperate sound. There was a rapid succession of deafening reports, 6 shots echoing through the small cabin, shattering the quiet, shattering Lena's life, shattering David's future. 6 times, the number resonated with an unnerving finality. Lena slumped, her eyes wide with disbelief and pain, before collapsing to the floor. A dark, crimson stain began to spread across her nightgown, blooming like a morbid flower. David stood over her, the gun still clutched in his hand, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rage, having found its release, receded, replaced by a horrifying, gut-wrenching emptiness. As he stared at her lifeless form, his eyes caught something clutched in her hand, a small, crumpled piece of paper. He knelt, his movements stiff, and carefully pried it from her fingers. Written in her familiar, elegant hand, now smeared with blood, were the words, "I forgive you, even if you can never forgive me." The sound of the gunshots had pierced the mountain tranquility, alerting a neighbor who swiftly called 911. Within minutes, the remote cabin was swarming with flashing blue and red lights, the piercing wail of sirens cutting through the night. Police officers, paramedics, and forensic teams descended upon the scene, their grim faces reflecting the somber reality of what had transpired. David Miller was found sitting quietly on the porch, the handgun resting on the table beside him, his eyes staring blankly into the darkness, a man utterly undone. He offered no resistance, no argument. In the sterile confines of the interrogation room, David recounted the events of the past 2 days with a chilling detachment. He admitted to shooting Lena, but his explanation was not one of malice or premeditation, at least not in the conventional sense. He spoke of the notebook, of Jaden Hayes, of the overwhelming sense of betrayal when he realized his wife was his childhood friend, a man who had transitioned into a woman. He articulated his profound confusion, the shattering of his identity, the feeling of having been made a mockery of. To the detectives, it was a complex narrative, a tragic intersection of personal identity, hidden truths, and violent emotional eruption. The story spread like wildfire, capturing national headlines, a true crime saga unlike any other, forcing society to confront uncomfortable questions about identity, deception, and the terrifying consequences of fear and misunderstanding. The cold, sterile walls of the courtroom offered no warmth, no solace, only the harsh glare of justice. David Miller, the man who had walked down an aisle full of hope, now sat in the defendant's chair, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, a stark shadow of the joyous groom he once was. The prosecution laid out their case with clinical precision. The discovery of Lena's body, the 6 fatal shots, David's immediate confession, and the chilling, unconventional motive. The defense, while acknowledging the tragic circumstances and David's profound emotional distress, struggled to reconcile the act with a man who had otherwise led an unremarkable, non-violent life. The trial captivated the nation. It was more than just a murder case. It was a societal mirror, reflecting uncomfortable truths about identity, perception, and the chasm that can exist between personal belief and human reality. Expert testimonies delved into the psychological impact of profound betrayal, the breakdown of self, and the often irrational fear of the unknown. Yet, for all the legal arguments and psychological dissections, the core tragedy remained brutally simple. A life ended, a love shattered, by a truth too painful for one man to bear. In the end, the jury delivered its verdict. David Miller was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, acknowledging the complex emotional factors but emphasizing the unforgivable act of violence, sentenced him to 35 years in prison. 35 years. A lifetime sentence for a man who just days before had envisioned a lifetime of happiness. He was led away, a figure of profound regret, into the unforgiving confines of the correctional system. The headlines roared, then faded, replaced by the next sensational story. But the echo of the honeymoon massacre lingered, a cautionary tale whispered in the annals of true crime. Years passed. The initial shock and outrage surrounding the case gradually subsided. David Miller served his time, a silent, introspective figure within the prison walls. The initial raw anger and confusion that had driven his actions slowly began to yield to something else, a gnawing, agonizing remorse. The image of Lena, lying lifeless on the cabin floor, haunted his waking hours and tormented his sleep. He began to reflect, to truly grapple with the depth of his actions, not just in the legal sense, but in the human sense. He thought of Lena's last words, the crumpled note clutched in her hand. "I forgive you, even if you can never forgive me." That simple act of grace, offered in her final moments, chipped away at the hardened shell of his denial and self-pity. He began to understand, slowly, agonizingly, that Lena's deception was born not of malice, but of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of losing the love she had found, fear of a world that often refuses to understand. And in that nascent understanding, he began to see his own fear, his own prejudice, as the true catalyst for the tragedy. He realized he had killed her not because she was trans, but because he couldn't reconcile his own understanding of love and identity with her truth. He had killed the woman he loved because he didn't know how to love what he didn't understand. After 3 long years, David made a decision. With the help of the prison chaplain, he recorded a video. It wasn't a public statement meant for fame or acquittal. It was a raw, unedited confession, not of guilt, for that had already been established, but of understanding. A confession of regret, a desperate plea for empathy, a final acknowledgement of Lena's humanity and her journey. "I was wrong." His voice, older and raspier, resonated through the video. "I was so profoundly wrong. Lena was a woman. She was my wife. And I killed her out of my own fear, my own ignorance, my own inability to see beyond a preconceived notion of what love and identity should be. I murdered the person I cherished because I couldn't forgive myself for what I thought it meant." The video was quietly posted online. It didn't go viral. It wasn't designed for a mass audience. It was simply a man, broken by his past, attempting to articulate a painful truth, to offer a belated apology to the memory of the woman he had destroyed. For 2 weeks, it remained relatively unnoticed, another digital whisper in the vast ocean of the internet. Then, a letter arrived at the prison. No return address, no name on the envelope, just Mr. Darius Simmons, referring to his original name in the source material, here adapted to David Miller. David opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, written in blue ink, the handwriting slightly uneven, as if penned by a trembling hand. It read, "Dear Mr. Miller, I watched your video. I'm 19. I'm trans. My parents kicked me out last year. I've been couch surfing ever since. I almost ended everything last month. Then I saw you, saw your face, heard your voice, heard the pain in it, the truth in it. And for some reason, it made me feel like maybe I wasn't invisible. Maybe I wasn't disgusting. Maybe someone like you, someone who messed up but still had the guts to say it, maybe you could make people see me for who I am. So, thank you. You saved someone you'll never meet, and I'll never forget your name. Jay." David sat still for a long time after reading it, the paper clutched in his hand. The weight of his past actions remained, immutable and unforgivable. But in that small handwritten letter, a tiny spark ignited. For the first time in over 3 years, David Miller did something no one in that prison had ever seen him do. He smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't joyful in the conventional sense, but it was real. A flicker of genuine human connection, reaching him through the iron bars and concrete walls. A testament to the unexpected power of truth, even when delivered by a broken man. The story of David and Lena is a harrowing reminder of the complexities of identity, the fragility of trust, and the devastating consequences of fear when confronted with the unknown. It urges us to look beyond surface perceptions, to embrace understanding over judgment, and to remember that every individual carries a story, a truth that deserves to be seen, acknowledged, and respected. For in the end, love, all love, is never a lie. It is our capacity for empathy, acceptance, and forgiveness that truly defines us. Perhaps, just perhaps, for David Miller, that small, real smile, born from a letter from a stranger, was the beginning of a different kind of redemption. Not for what he did, but for what he finally understood. And in that understanding lies a universal lesson for us all.